Jackal Among Snakes. Author, Nemorosus. Chapter 11, Lion Cub's First Hunt. Elias alighted from the carriage at the gates of Vendel-Ebba, scanning the small town streets thoroughly. He had removed the grey robe of the Order of the Grey Owl, instead donning the traditional white and gold of his house Parban. After searching the streets for a time for the banner bearing the golden lion, he walked to the men guarding the gate. "Excuse me," Elias asked, touching one guard's shoulder lightly. "Have you seen a large party of horsemen come through here with the banner of House Parban?" The guard jumped a little, and then looked up at Elias. Yes, we did. The Lord told us to." "Well, I probably shouldn't say." The guard stopped himself. Elias frowned. "Are they here, then?" "Aye," the guard nodded. "Most of them are camping outside the walls. I think they let a few stay in the inn on the western side of town, though." The guard pointed. "The Rattled Rein, it's called." "Thank you," said Elias, retrieving a gold coin and handing it to the guard. "Oh." The guard brightened. Elias turned and strode quickly to where the guard had pointed. "Thank you," the guard yelled out, but Elias paid it little heed. Half running through the streets, Elias kept an eye on the wooden signs hanging above doorways. Once he spotted the Rattled Rein, he paused, catching his breath before entering the doorway. Some familiar faces turned to meet him, some of his father's knights. "Lukin, Missile," Elias greeted, walking towards them. "Where's Elias?" a deep voice echoed through the inn. Elias turned his head towards the stairs, watching as his father slowly walked down into the inn's common room. He looked disheveled, his long red hair splayed out across his plate mail in thick, greasy strands. "Father," Elias said, moving to greet him. "I came as soon as I heard that you had left Parban." "Why are you here?" Margrave Reinhardt asked angrily. "You're supposed to be in the Tower of the Grey Owl." "My term as a student is over," Elias explained quickly. He held out a steel badge that bore an owl on it. "I'm a wizard of the Grey Owl. Now my research was admissible." Reinhardt prodded his chest with a finger, sending Elias back a step. "And so you come here, instead of heading back to Parban?" "I should stand idly by while you go to help my uncle?" Elias spoke, matching his father's bravado. Reinhardt grit his teeth for a minute. Then, he stepped forward, hugging his son tightly. After a moment, they pulled away. The Margrave kept a firm grip on Elias' shoulders. "Congratulations, Elias. I did not think a son of mine would ever become a wizard, but that doesn't change the fact that I am proud." Elias smiled slightly. It seemed a rare expression on both of the men's faces. They sat at one of the tables in the corner, alone. "In truth, I didn't think I would be able to find you at Vendel-Ebba. I assumed you would already have started onwards to Dirika." "I wanted to. We ran into trouble." "A cunning snake," Reinhardt said resentfully. "I knew I should have taken my wyvern instead of a horse." Elias placed his hands on the table, looking at his father as he slouched on the table. "Trouble with such a large host in tow? Was it one of the king's eldest sons?" "No. Argrave, the royal bastard." The Margrave looked to his hands, a grim and wrathful look settled on his face. "What?" Elias asked incredulously. He'd seen his father have that expression before, but it was only after a great defeat. "But I don't believe he's even reached C-rank magic, yet." "How?" His magic was hardly relevant. But his words. Even thinking back, he led me by the nose like a fool. He was traveling with the Duke of Montesai's daughter and a child of House Veden. I forget who. Mina. Elias filled in the blanks. "Right." Reinhardt nodded. "I thought to take him as a hostage. He came willingly. It made me let my guard down. The whole way, he complained about horses and hating them. He played my temper, stoked my doubts, made himself appear weak, and ingrained his hatred of horses into my head. I thought to punish him by having him sleep next to the horses." The Margrave grit his teeth. "Probably what he wanted the whole time." "From there, he frenzied them." "A fire pit and illusion magic," they said. "He stole my horse, rode towards the coast. The men spent hours getting the mounts back in order." Reinhardt slammed the table slightly. Elias leaned back in the chair, holding his hand to his chin. "He has the cunning natural to the House of Vaska. Their banner bears a snake, and it suits them." "That one is a snake with a silver tongue," Reinhardt brooded. The men were up for hours chasing horses. "They need rest, as do the horses." "We'll head to Dirika tomorrow. If you're to come with me, you should sleep. Some rooms are available upstairs." "We rented out the whole inn." "Right," Elias said absent-mindedly. "You said Argrave rode towards the coast?" "Mateth." "You must have sent someone after him." "Probably Mateth, yes." Reinhardt straightened, leaning back in the chair until the plate he was wearing creaked. The Duke's daughter seemed willing to protect him. "He'll head towards seek protection." "I didn't bother sending anyone. By the time I knew he was gone, it was far too late to send anyone after him. He stole the best horse we had, my Redsno. I had to borrow one of my knight's horses." "I see," said Elias, a hint of frustration on his tone. "You should go and sleep." "I have far too much energy left to sleep just yet, and I've not eaten. The innkeeper makes decent food." "Ask her," Reinhardt said, handing Elias a few gold coins from a pouch. "We'll wake early tomorrow." "And son?" The Margrave paused. "Yes, I'm glad you came." Reinhardt patted his shoulder and walked up the stairs. "Ah. Elias did not know how to answer. He watched his father's red hair fade out of view, and then the rest of the knights followed close behind him. Elias stayed in the common room. The innkeeper sat at a bar stool at the other side of the room. After a few minutes had passed, Elias stood and left the rattletrain. He walked towards the gate of the city. The suns were just beginning to fade. He saw a few of his father's knights and followed them. After exiting Vendelebbe, Elias saw a few horses stabled up. Elias approached without issue, as most of the knights recognized his crimson hair common in House Parban. The horses seemed thoroughly guarded, but the knights wouldn't dare impede the Margrave's heir. Elias scanned the horses, looking for the one that looked most suitable. He spotted the one that looked the fastest and strongest, and walked to it. Young Lord Elias, one of the knights interrupted. It's an honor to see you, but my father gave me something to deliver, Elias explained. I need a horse post-haste. Oh, the knight said. In that case, pardon me. He bowed and walked away. Elias got atop the horse, and after a few minutes of adjustment, set off into a canter. When they were far enough away, he urged the horse into a gallop. I'm sorry, father. I won't be of much help to you in the capital, more a hindrance. I should head to Mateth, find Argrave, mete out punishment. Or at least, try and find Red Snow. In the back of his head, Elias couldn't help but acknowledge the fact that his sister was the first thing on his mind. In truth, Elias felt he was blindly stumbling forward towards some vague attempt at a vengeance he didn't even know how to enact. He suppressed his doubts and rode onwards towards Mateth. Coincidentally and entirely unbeknownst to Elias, the horse he had taken was the one that the Margrave Reinhardt had borrowed to replace his white stallion. It was midday. Argrave stood at the docks in Mateth, staring up at one of the buildings with his back facing the sea. He kept his gaze fixed on a pigeon. He had the distinct feeling that he was locking gazes with it. It stayed a fair distance away from the seagulls, refusing to eat or travel. I'll need to do something about these pigeons soon, Argrave thought. Argrave turned his head away and walked from the docks. He had secured one card to play against the coming tides. Gerechtig Kiet was coming. No matter what the player did in Heroes of Berenda, his summoning was inevitable. He was the millennial auditor for the world's continued existence. His name was German for justice. He was the test offered by the world itself to determine if it was worthy of existing, or if a new one was necessary. Fantasy, Darwinism, in essence, as was natural with ancient calamities, Gerechtig Kiet's method of judgment was through strength. Mateth, probably the richest city in the continent of Berenda and the capital of the dukedom of Montesai, would soon suffer an unexpected invasion. This problem would be exacerbated by the impending civil war and the succession crisis caused by the death of King Felipe III. None of those events had happened yet, but they were inevitable, guided to happen by innumerable factors. Personal strength alone could not defeat the ancient calamity. One would need an army. Feels like Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? Argrave sighed, weaving his way through this city he knew all too well. He grabbed the bronze hand mirror in his breast pocket to remind himself of his duty. The invaders coming to Mateth came from a land overseas. The people in Berenda called them snow elves, which was a fitting term going off appearance alone. They were elven in appearance and descent, but they had many differences from the forest dwellers far in the south. Their skin was paler, their hairs were lighter, and they were much larger. They called themselves Veidaemon. Their nation was Veiden. They followed a patriarch, who was the head of the innumerable conquered tribes. Some of the snow elves inhabited Berenda already, having been exiled from Veiden. Others simply sought greener pastures. Argrave found them quite interesting. Theirs was a militaristic, honor-focused society excelling in warfare. Contracts were almost sacred exchanges in their culture. At the same time, they were uncompromising enemies who viewed conquest as an inevitability and a duty vested by their god. Argrave was planning on meeting one of those snow elves. He was an exile and a mercenary. Even with Erlebni blessing of supersession, Argrave needed some concrete and reliable protection. Quite frankly, he didn't fancy his chances in a fight against most anyone. A Veidaemon mercenary could always be trusted, despite racist sentiments persisting throughout Berenda. They would never forsake a contract for a higher-paying enemy, even if that enemy was the Patriarch of Veiden. They believed their goddess would condemn them to their version of the underworld, and perhaps she would. Argrave was counting on that loyalty. Argrave came to a stop at a certain establishment in Mateth. The building looked seedy, it was decrepit, unmarked, and Argrave pulled his gloves a little tighter as he looked at it. He did not wish to linger here long, to say the least. He grabbed the iron ring that marked the door gingerly and pulled it open. Raucous noise filled Argrave's ears at once. He entered into the building and closed the door. Argrave caught many gazes, he presumed, and hoped, because of his height, but most were too busy with their own food and drink to do anything more than look. Argrave's eyes scanned the room. He looked at the Veidaemon mercenary's usual spot, but no one sat there. He grew disappointed and uneasy. In his peripheries, he saw a familiar black helmet modeled after the Vikings and a large great sword leaning against one of the wall's pillars. Argrave smiled, weaving through the crowd while trying his best not to touch anyone. He stepped over some spilled drink and came to stand over precisely the man he'd been looking for. "Gluman?" Argrave asked. The man in question lifted his head up slowly. He had a mane of white hair that looked like fine silk, falling far past his sharp ears and broad shoulders. His face was firm and stoic, his skin far paler than Argrave's. He had near entirely white eyes, the iris separated from the sclera by only a thin black line. In stark contrast to his features, he wore black armor. It was mostly plate, yet grey fur covered the shoulders. The snow elf had been sharpening a dagger with a whetstone. "It is you." Argrave nodded when his question went unanswered. "Wonderful. I'd like to hire you." Glimmen scanned Argrave quickly with his eyes. Then, he pointed to the opposite chair with his dagger. "Sit." The snow elf's voice was deep and guttural, enough to make the faint of heart tremble in their boots. Argrave made sure the chair had nothing spilt on it, then sat as he was directed. He was unoffended by Glimmen's brief command. This was simply the man's nature. Glimmen retrieved a flask in his pouch and took a drink. That might deter a prospective employer, seeing the mercenary drink so casually. It wasn't whiskey, though. It was blood. Glimmen was exiled from Vaiden because he was a vampire. Argrave placed his hands on the table, crossing them over each other. "I have an employment offer for you." Mercenary work. Chapter 12. Strike up the band. Glimmen drew the dagger across the whetstone one final time, and then rubbed it down with a cloth. He put it back in its sheath and set it on the table beside his helmet. He straightened his posture and stared at Argrave. "The work is fairly long-term," Argrave continued. 6 months. 3,000 gold. Argrave saw some heads turn when he mentioned the amount. "You know my rates," Glimmen said. "Someone referred you?" Glimmen's voice was a low rasp, enough to give Argrave chills up his spine. He briefly felt envious. He had no issues with his own voice, per se, but to have a voice like that, well, it would be damned nice. Maybe if he inhaled hot timbers for a couple of hours. Something like that. Argrave nodded, dismissing his vocal envy. Glimmen did not react. "Who am I guarding?" "Me." Argrave pointed both of his thumbs at himself. "I have some enemies, you see. I plan to make more. I won't demand you do anything unreasonable, though the terms can be ironed out when we draft the contract." Glimmen nodded slightly, face still unmoving. "You'll provide room and board?" "Yes, though we may be camping frequently. I would ask that you hunt, should that be the case." "You have the coin?" "Not on me," Argrave said quickly and loudly so as to deter any listeners. "We would have to go to the bank, draft a contract, and then I could give it to you, in coin, if necessary." Argrave tapped his fingers on the table. "Any other questions?" Glimmen stared Argrave down, and then retrieved his flask for another drink. He set it aside, then shook his head. "No, he doesn't even ask for my name, my position in society." Really, his confidence would seem like recklessness if I didn't know fully how good this guy was at his job. "Good. But I have some things to say to you." "So?" Argrave held his hands up and cast a D-rank illusion spell, Isolate. It prevented sounds from leaking out. A simple yet efficient spell. Of course, it was an illusion spell and not a warding spell, so a sufficiently high-level spellcaster could resist its effects. Not that he'd find them in this seedy place. Argrave did not know any warding spells, though. He would have to change that in the future. "Our words won't reach beyond this table now," Argrave said. 1. Argrave held up a finger. "I know you were exiled from Vaiden." 2. Argrave held up a second finger. "I know why. Don't worry, I wouldn't have even talked to you had that been an issue." Glimmen's stoic face finally showed some expression. His brows furrowed, and his lips fell into a scowl. "Why was I exiled, then?" "You." Argrave hesitated. Even with the spell, he did not feel comfortable saying it out loud. Vampires were nearly universally reviled. If any high-level spellcaster were to overhear, it would make things very uncomfortable. Such people would not be common in such a place, but Argrave was not incautious. "You have an iron-rich diet," Argrave said, spreading his hands. Glimmen stared, and Argrave considered that most people of the Middle Ages would have no idea that iron was in the blood. "You like a certain salty drink," he continued, waving his hands. No, that sounds wrong. You're a bloodthirsty warrior." "Enough," interrupted Glimmen. "Why mention this if you have no issue with it?" Argrave shrugged. "In a long-term partnership, both sides should be honest with each other, I think. The people of Vaiden are honorable. You're especially so. As long as you keep me from harm, I don't care if you drink on the job. Just don't expect me to pay for the drinks," Argrave warned vaguely. "On the bright side, your kind doesn't need to sleep." If older vampires kept drinking blood, the sunlight would not damage them, and they would not require sleep. That was why Glimmen always carried around a flask. Indeed, vampirism seemed a vaguely appealing idea to Argrave. If not for the fact that blood nauseated him, he might have even considered it further. "I see." Glimmen stood. Argrave had to look a long way up. He decided to stand also. Glimmen was huge, well-built, and even barely taller than Argrave. "I must quickly fetch some things. I'll wait. Then we'll go to the bank." "Yes," Glimmen agreed. He walked away, and the crowd parted for him as he left. Argrave sat back down in the table, dispelling their isolate barrier. The two had very quickly become the most eye-catching people in the establishment, between their mention of Glimmen's ostensibly exorbitant fee and their very distinct physical appearance. "Oi," called a bald man sitting in a table across from his. Argrave ignored him. "Oi. Black hair." "Talking to ya?" Argrave kept ignoring him. The man got out of his chair and reached for Argrave's shoulder. Not wishing to be touched, Argrave cast a simple shock spell, and the man jumped back. "Watch it, wizard," the man hissed. Argrave crossed his arms, paying attention as much to his surroundings as he was the man in front of him. He felt ill at ease. "You shouldn't hire that snow elf," the bald man insisted, pointing at a careful distance. "And why not?" asked Argrave coldly, not caring to hear the answer. "You stick with your own," he said, putting his fist to his chest. "That white-haired bastard'll likely put a knife in your chest as you sleep." Argrave just shook his head. "I'm trying to look out for you here. Nothing good comes out of that one. I presume you'd prefer I hire you." Argrave waved his hand. "Go back to your table, leave me in peace." "Nay, I don't want your gold. You look a noble. Nothing good comes from getting mixed up with you." The bald man shook his head. "But people that talk ill of him, they end up missing. Nobody ever found." "I'm just warning you." Argrave frowned, somewhat surprised at that. The bald man seemed somewhat genuine. Argrave didn't let his guard down, though. "The Vadimen never break a contract." Argrave shook his head. "Even if he did disappear some people, that's not my concern." Novelisp.com. The bald man shook his head, calling Argrave a fool beneath his breath before he sat back down. Argrave turned his head to see Gilliman returning. He had a strung bow on his back, an axe and dagger on his waist, and a bag hanging from his shoulder. He collected his hair and put it behind him, donning his helmet. Then he grabbed his greatsword and strung it to his waist, opposite his other weapons. "I'm ready," he said simply. Argrave smiled at the familiar sight. "So you are." He stood, and the two left for the bank. Gilliman thoroughly examined the contract that Argrave had written. Once he reached the end, he set it down on the bank's counter gently and looked at Argrave. The bank clerk sat there nervously. A giant snow elf in black armor was standing right in front of him, and Gilliman did not seem over-friendly. "To summarize, the job is mainly protection, and you don't wish to be touched unless the situation demands it." "Yes." "No bloody murder butchery, no secret assassinations, just a retained sword I can count on by my side." Gilliman took a drink from his flask, and then signed the paper. Argrave gestured for the clerk to hand over the bank note with the custom amount, deducting it from his account. The 3,000 gold loss would sting, to be sure, but insurance was more important than wealth. "Have a good day, sirs," the bank clerk said professionally. "How should I call you?" Gilliman said, tone professional and distant now that the contract was formally established. "Just Argrave." He walked towards the exit and pushed out of the doorway into the streets of Materth. "Walk closer so I can speak quietly." Gilliman obeyed quickly, and Argrave spoke. "The next few weeks will be very busy. The Patriarchate of Vaiden has been preparing an invasion on Materth for some time. The time of their landing is going to come very shortly, and I need to minimize damages." Gilliman missed a step but recovered quickly and kept walking beside Argrave, hand on the pommel of his great sword. "There are some pigeons spaced out on the roofs." Oddly equidistantly, Argrave pointed, looking up at them. "They don't scrounge for food like other pigeons. They don't travel in groups. Once night falls, they will coincidentally fly away." Argrave looked at Gilliman pointedly. "They're scouts being controlled by druids, Vadimen druids, specifically, and I need to get my hands on their reports." After observing the pigeons for a time, Gilliman looked back at Argrave. "You're sure they're Vadimen druids?" "Well, if they aren't, it'd be a pleasant surprise." Argrave shrugged. "I have my own way of knowing these things. They're led by a druid called Tyros." "Tyros?" Gilliman repeated. "Tyros the Tempestuous. He's a prominent druid in Vaiden working for the Patriarch." "This is no ruse, then." "Oh. You know him." "Good. Do you think you could kill him?" Argrave asked. "With my help, naturally." "I don't know your strength." "Spellcaster, D-rank magic spells, mostly." "If he didn't have arms, perhaps," Gilliman said hesitantly. He patted the axe on his waist. "This axe is made of ebonice. It can dispel magic on contact." "But Tyros would not be alone." "Animal familiars, fellow druids." "Yes, indeed. If we fought him as we were, we'd be Valhalla bound at the speed of sound." Argrave shook his head. "But I'm at the cusp of comprehending C-rank magic, I think." Argrave remembered he'd left his book about C-rank magic aboard Nicoletta's carriage. That was a library book. "I've got to get it back." "Ugh. And besides, what's the quote? Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war and then seek to win. That is to say, if we prepare, Tyros is nothing but a stiff breeze, not a tempest." "Ha ha." Argrave laughed at his own joke. He resumed walking through the streets of Materth. "For now, Gilliman, we head to the local branch of the Order of the Grey Owl. It's the small little temple in the northwest part of town." "Well, just follow along. We'll find out if I'm as clever as I thought I was." Gilliman stood rooted in place for a moment. The snow elf considered, for the first time in near 100 years, that his self-confidence may have gotten him into trouble. This employer of his seemed positively determined to march to his death. He opened his flask, and the scent of blood filled his nostrils. He took a large drink, sating the beast within him. The sunlight felt a little gentler on his skin. All have to die someday. Chapter 13, A Prince's Penalty. Argrave looked up at two great stone owls, hanging over the entrance to the Order's hub in Mateth-like gargoyles that were a quarter as scary. Argrave thought that owls were far too rotund and bizarre to ever be as scary as the other birds. Just wait out here, if you would, Argrave directed Gilliman. I think they only let acolytes and higher inside the Order itself. Annoying, but what can you do? Understood, said Gilliman. Argrave bit his lip a little. Just find a quiet place. I'm sure some ignorant people might be troubled by a V-diamond standing right out front there. I know, Gilliman interrupted. After a nod, wave, and a wink, Argrave entered the Order's Mateth branch. As long as he had one of the badges of the Order, his was a copper owl marking him as an acolyte, kept in his leather gear's chest pocket, he could enter the premises freely. Without the badge, one would be restricted by some particularly powerful enchantments. This place was much less busy than the Tower of the Grey Owl. The tower was a bona fide school, with instructors and students abounding. The branches throughout the major cities in Berenda were more like libraries, with only minimal services needed by wizards. Mostly, it referred members of the Order to private businesses that would fulfill their arcane needs. Argrave ducked beneath the doorframe and stepped into the administrative office, where a brunette woman busily tended to papers. She looked up when she saw Argrave approach. "How may I help you, sir?" she asked drearily. "Hello, Miriam. Nice to see you again," Argrave said, recognizing her. "I am here to inquire about the results of the acolyte graduations." Oh, she stuttered, coming to attention. Argrave wondered why for a minute, only to catch her looking up at his face. "What is she?" "Oh, I know her name, but she doesn't know mine. She thinks she forgot we met before." "I see." Argrave suppressed a smile with his gloved hand. He'd stumbled onto a fun new hobby, making people uncomfortable by knowing random details about them. "The results arrived by owl early this morning. I can tell you the results, but you'll have to go see Burn to get a wizard's badge." She shifted some papers aside and pulled out a slightly crinkled parchment. "That is, if you passed, sir." "And, did I?" Argrave pressed gleefully. Miriam's eyes darted to the paper, and at Argrave's face. He could practically hear the gears turn in her head, desperately trying to remember a name she'd never heard. "Perhaps you'd best look for yourself, sir." She handed the paper to him, escaping the pitfall Argrave had set up. He clicked his tongue and took the paper. Argrave didn't need to look for long before he found his name. It was at the very top of the paper, beneath a label glamorously decorated with gold and stars reading, "Special Consideration." A few other names were below and above his: Mina of Vedon, Richard, and Svetlana of Quadrian. All of them were powerful spellcaster characters in Heroes of Berenda. "Special Consideration," Argrave said, angling the paper. "What does this mean for me?" "Oh, I suppose I should be congratulating you," Miriam answered. "Acolytes centered for Special Consideration have submitted something that has value to the Order beyond a mere advancement from acolyte to wizard. Some of the high wizards of the Order are taking the time to evaluate its precise usefulness to reward you appropriately." Argrave put his hand to his chin. High wizards are those capable of B-rank magic. He felt a nugget of worry festering in his heart. "You need A-rank blood magic to learn, blood infusion, and I left plenty out of my concept of blood infusion. I don't think they'll be able to complete the research independently." I suppose some positive attention is what I wanted, in part, but I can still get my recognition as a wizard, right?" Argrave asked, brows furrowing. Miriam crossed her hands atop her desk. "Unfortunately, until the process is finished, that can't be granted." "That's annoying." Argrave handed the paper back to Miriam. "Look at me, so special, barred from getting the only thing I came here for. I wanted to buy some things to prepare for the druids with the remainder of the money I made selling that horse. I can't purchase from some sellers without the badge of a wizard of the Grey Owl." Argrave lost himself in thought at this wrench in his plan. "Perhaps I can help with that, little brother," came a warm, pleasant voice from behind Argrave. Chills ran up Argrave's spine the second he processed who it belonged to. Argrave turned his head very slowly. A man leaned against the doorframe. He was tall, lithe, and well-built. His face had a strong resemblance to Argrave's, though it was far less gaunt. He had obsidian hair and bright blue eyes. His clothing was black, highlighted with gold and studded with gems tastefully. On his collar, sleeves, and shoulders, a sewn symbol depicted a golden snake weaved around a sword, the symbol of the House of Vasca. His name was Indune of Vasca, eldest son of King Felipe III and heir to the throne. He was also the last person Argrave wished to speak to, in this life or the next. In Argrave's haste to stand, the chair he sat on creaked loudly. He placed his hand to his chest and said quickly, "Prince Indune." Perhaps Indune was fond of Argrave's troubled haste, for he smiled a little. "Maybe I shouldn't call you little brother anymore, seeing as you're taller than even me." He joked with all the geniality a normal, sane older brother might possess. Argrave wasn't fooled for a second. "One of my blessings, Prince Indune," Argrave responded after a pause. The words were insincere. Being this tall was terribly inconvenient, as a matter of fact. "So it is," Indune agreed with a nod. He stood from the doorframe. "Come, Now we should speak in private. I believe I can help you regarding that wizard's badge you need. Argrave froze up a little. Indune was terrifying because, like most of his siblings, he was incredibly arbitrary. Worse yet, he was both a powerful warrior and a great mage. He was a high wizard in the Order of the Grey Owl, and well on the track to mastering A-rank magic. Thank you for even considering it, Prince Indune. Argrave flattered. Being with Indune would be dangerous, but refusing him would be even more so. He was petty. Unlike his other siblings, though, his revenge was more insidious. He enjoyed torturing people psychologically. Argrave considered if this encounter was karma for his slight teasing of Miriam. Indune walked out of the administrative office and led the two of them to a room on the second floor. Two royal guards stood, a man and a woman, both guarding the room diligently. Their gold armor shone resplendently, shining both because of the metal and the powerful enchantments inlaid atop it. That armor could resist much of the damage caused by magic and furthermore strengthen their physical capabilities. Even without the armor, the royal guards were very powerful. Argrave knew they could probably bend steel. Argrave and Indune entered the room. It was the quarters of the manager of the Mateth branch of the Order, and the branch manager stood off to the side in grey-white robes, hands clasped behind his back. The royal guards followed behind them and closed the door. I'm quite annoyed, Argrave, began Indune. The endearing term of little brother dropped now that they were in privacy. After all the trouble I went out in choosing a gift for you, I find that you've returned it to the shop. Argrave walked a little closer, standing beside the chair across from the desk without sitting. What do you want me to say, Prince Indune? The gift did not fit. I've grown much since you last saw me. Don't get cute with me, Indune retorted, sitting down in the branch manager's chair. He gestured to the seat beside Argrave, commanding, sit. At least he gives me a chance to talk. If there's one thing I'm good at, it's talking, Argrave thought. After obeying Indune's command to sit, Argrave waited patiently for Indune to continue. Indune leaned back in the chair casually. Even if you did not want it, you shouldn't have returned it. His icy blue eyes stared Argrave down. It makes me question if you were trying to trample on my goodwill. I wouldn't dare, Prince Indune, Argrave said, holding out his hands. I simply came to know during my time at the Tower of the Grey Owl that Nicoletta was no threat to your succession. She is not a materialistic person. Indune took a deep breath, then exhaled. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the branch manager's desk. Do you remember when I killed your mother? Argrave was a bit taken aback by the question, and he sat in stunned silence for a few seconds. This was a tidbit of lore that Argrave did not know. Fortunately, Indune's question was rhetorical. My mother died giving birth to me. Growing up, our father told me, love makes a man weak. Without your mother, you will be stronger, Indune said, lowering his voice in impression of King Felipe III. Our mothers are the most loving creatures in our lives. Their love makes us weak. I thought to teach you that lesson, as was my duty as the elder brother. What complete nonsense, Argrave thought. You just get off to killing people's parents in front of them. One of the other main characters' story revolved around seeking revenge for their parents. Indune's primary pleasure in life was orphaning children while they watched. Have you fallen in love with Nicoletta of Montesai, brother? Indune asked, low and intently. Argrave frowned. Of course not. She's my cousin. First cousin, at that. And she's a messy person, not to mention a goody two-shoes. Are you sure? Indune asked again. Because that's the only reason I could even begin to consider. Indune slammed his fist on the desk and inhaled deeply, then muttered quietly. How you could act so naively. Indune stood quickly, walking around the desk to stand above Argrave. Nicoletta is not the problem. Nicoletta is the weapon, he explained gently, as though to a child. Her cause can be heralded by others, people like her father, or the other nobles. If she is seen as upstanding, that causes problems for the peace in this kingdom of Vaska. Indune clenched his hands into fists. If you take their weapon from them, they must use their fists. You see my fists? Argrave's head swam and his vision went white. He felt a terrible pain and his mind struggled to focus. It was only when he found his face was on the ground that he realized that he'd been struck. He tried to move his jaw, but it felt terribly ajar. Something roughly gripped his arm, and then he was placed back on the chair. His ears were ringing, but he saw Indune speaking to the branch manager about something. The man walked over, and Argrave flinched away. A spell matrix appeared in the air in front of the branch manager's hand, and Argrave felt his jaw moving. It was a deeply uncomfortable thing, but it was barely noticeable in front of the pain. The pain and the tinnitus slowly faded away as the branch manager's healing magic did its work, and Indune's voice was audible again. The punishment to chopping off some fingers once I heard your research was of high quality. Later, though, when I'd heard of the embarrassment you made the Margrave suffer, I reduced it to just that. Be thankful, brother, for my mercy. Argrave stroked his jaw. He pulled away his hand and saw blood on the leather gloves. Some blood dripped onto his legs, and he felt an overpowering urge to vomit. He had never been hit like that before. He was certain his cheekbone had been shattered, his jaw had been dislocated, and his nose had broken. The healing magic had fixed it, but the blood remained. Indune sat down again. Do not deliberately disobey me again, Argrave. Are we clear? He paused, waiting for an answer, and then repeated more deliberately, Are we clear? Yes, he answered quietly. "Wipe off your face," Indune commanded. "It's unsightly." Argrave retrieved his handkerchief from his gear's pockets, wetting it with water magic and quietly wiping his face off. His head was a whirlwind of fear battling with intense anger. "Now that the unpleasant part of the conversation has concluded, I can talk about something that may please you more. Your badge as a wizard, I will have the branch manager give it to you." Indune snapped, and the branch manager stepped forward. "Give me your hand," he said. Argrave mutely obeyed. The branch manager placed a steel badge depicting an owl in Argrave's palm. Some magic flowed through the air like a tangible white thread, and subtle inscriptions on the badge's surface started to glow white. The process was done quickly, and the branch manager wiped some sweat off his brow. "There, it's done. Do not lose it," the man said gruffly, without any respect. He walked back to where he had been standing. "That is done, then." "Congratulations, brother," Indune said with a warm smile. "But that can hardly be called reward. Though I am sure the order will reward you appropriately for the research. My insider in the tower says that even the tower master has taken an interest in your particular thesis. What's more, you made the Margrave suffer a major blow to his prestige. I'm told he lost a precious horse." Indune stood once more, and Argrave tensed involuntarily. "Though you are my brother, you are still a bastard, technically a commoner, given your mother's lowly origins. I think that should be rectified." He snapped his finger. "Rita, if you would." The female royal guard walked forward and handed Indune a set of documents. Indune weighed them in his hands, then offered them to Argrave. "My father and I are doubtless to be busy with the Margrave's little protest in the coming days, so we cannot name you a noble immediately. But this... well, this is your estate, brother. A seaside castle, a rather famous location." Chapter 14, A Prince's Prize. Argrave took the documents Indune was offering him. He tore the small red strip keeping them bound and took a look at the contents. A seaside castle was, by its location alone, more valuable than most inland estates. Once he saw the name on the deed, though, Argrave couldn't help but smile. Foamspire. Ha! A fitting gift from Indune. "It's like a bright red apple that's rotten once you bite in, or a block of gold that's lead on the inside." "I see you're pleased," said Indune, noticing Argrave's smile. "I hope that you realize, just as the punishments for disobeying me are great, so are the rewards for being loyal. And I hope, further, that this meeting demonstrates you can hide nothing from me." Argrave looked up from the deed, already proving Indune wrong as he hid his amusement. "He really suits the banner he bears, the snake on his cuffs. That's him to a T. He's a good manipulator, but knowing his nature is precisely what one needs to escape the web he weaves. I never expected that I'd own Foamspire. I've heard tell of it, a castle of marble at the top of a great sea arch. It serves as a lighthouse for sailors to the nearby town and has quite formidable defenses. One could house near 1,000 knights there. One can see the ocean stretch for miles atop it. And it's said to be warm all year round, a regular Xanadu on this mortal realm." Argrave talked it up like it was a sales pitch. "And a castle that's fated to fall into the ocean this year. How wonderful." Argrave held the deed close. "Thank you, Prince Indune. Now that I've shown some worth to him, cleverness, magical talent, he'll try to win me over to his side. This rich castle is fated to be rubble in the sea in not a few months, and he knows that. If you're pleased, that is enough." Indune nodded and walked to the door. "Truth be told, you did something of a service to the House of Vaska. Facing the wrath of both Parbon and Montesai would be more difficult. They have many friends. Then I will do my best to ensure that Montesai stays neutral, or even loyal, in the days to come." Argrave swore. It was not technically a lie. He didn't wish for Montesai to join the impending civil war. They had to focus their powers on the Vadaemon. Indune nodded. "Good. But you should remember that Nicoletta's fate will not change. Discard any delusions that might be festering." Argrave nodded. Indune and the royal knights walked swiftly out of the door. Only once it was shut did he let his expression relax. He stood, casting a glance at the branch manager. "Thank you for healing me, Elbert," Argrave commented. Even if the man had been brusque, greeting rudeness with rudeness only bred enmity. Besides, he didn't wish to leave alongside Prince Indune. The branch manager raised an eyebrow. "Don't thank me. I was merely showing deference to the prince and a fellow high wizard of the order." Argrave wiped his bloodied glove off with the handkerchief. "You still did it. That counts for something." Elbert moved to his desk. "Get out." Then, complying, Argrave walked back out into the hall. He opened the door to an empty hall, save two familiar people, Nicoletta and Mina. They were both watching the stairway, presumably because the heir to the throne had just walked by out of the blue. Nicoletta wore a shoulder bag and a fancy blue dress complete with resplendent jewelry, while Mina had donned more casual leather gear bereft of accessories. "Nicoletta, good timing. I wanted to ask you about a book I left on your carriage," Argrave said casually, in part to dispel his own mood of gloom. Mina started and looked in his direction. "Whoa, it's you, Grave." "You?" Mina paused, her face slowly freezing up. Nicoletta turned to face him calmly, but soon enough her face was just as perturbed. "Grave?" Argrave pressed Mina. "Is that your nickname for me? Better than gravy, I suppose." "Disgusting food. Bland, slimy." "Okay with bread, I'll admit," Argrave rambled. "Argrave, you." Why are you all bloody? Nicoletta reached a tentative hand forward. More importantly, Argrave diverted cheerfully, stepping away from her hand. Why exactly are you two here? We thought we'd find you here, because you'd mentioned. Nicoletta trailed off. No, I don't think this is more important. What happened to you? Not to mention the blood, you look pale. Even more than usual, and much skinnier. Who can say? Really? Argrave dismissed vaguely. Anyway, back to that book. No, back to the blood, Grave. Mina interjected. Your brother just walked by. Don't think. I'm fine, aren't I? Argrave held his arms wide. No injuries, no scratches. My handsome face is still handsome. He caressed his chin. For all you know, I just got through eating someone alive. Argrave couldn't be sure and Dune didn't have people listening in. The Crown Prince had learned what Argrave had been up to very quickly. It stood to reason he had an extensive network of people willing and ready to hand whatever secrets they heard straight up to Dune. The branch manager Elbert was one such example. If you don't want to talk about it, fine, Nicoletta said, a bit of coldness seeping into her tone. It's not that I don't want to, Argrave said. Perhaps at another time, another place, he tried to hint subtly. I'm simply preoccupied. Preoccupied? Are you kidding me? Nicoletta asked incredulously. Mina tugged on her friend's blue sleeve and said lightly, Nikki. She leaned forward and whispered something in Nicoletta's ear. Argrave could feel a faint pulse of magic around Mina's mouth. It was probably an illusion spell of some kind designed to mask words. I'm sorry, Argrave. I shouldn't pry, Nicoletta said, trying to sound conciliatory in light of her misinterpretation. As for that book. Here. Nicoletta reached the shoulder bag and pulled out the familiar book. Argrave's face lit up. He took it and nearly wiped it off with his handkerchief before remembering it was soaked in his blood. Never thought Mina would catch on quicker than you, Nicoletta. Mina frowned. What does that? How auspicious. This book, Argrave interrupted. I would hate to lose the first book I took out of the tower. Argrave bowed. Thank you for keeping it for me. Mina's yellow eyes seemed to spark with anger, and she fumed silently in the background as Nicoletta crossed her arms. I am glad I was able to return it to you. I feared I would not be able to. People that like to bear their burden alone tend to end in an early grave, she said pointedly. Oh, yes. This burden on my back is wearing at my spine, Argrave said trollily. I assure you, I'm doing fine. Nicoletta shook her head. Your other luggage is at my father's estate. I can take you to it, if you please. Keep it. It's all clothes. You can take it out and stare at it when you miss me, which is sure to happen often. I'm going to throw it out, she answered without missing a beat. At least sell it, Argrave protested. Those clothes have to be worth something. A paltry sum to you, to be fair, but for royal bastards like myself. Argrave paused. On that matter, I have a favor to ask. We aren't on your carriage, so I think it's permissible. Argrave looked at Mina, but she didn't seem bothered. He briefly wondered if she was starting to warm up to him. Nicoletta frowned. It depends on what it is. Nothing major, or at least I think not. I was simply wondering if it would be possible to get access to the Beretta Troop auction. The Beretta Troop auction was full of high rollers with plenty of money to throw around. A player required a certain level of fame to participate without a recommendation. Usually, one could only get that recommendation during a certain quest. Argrave hoped to circumvent that. If it's just that. Nicoletta took a second to consider. Why? Has something there caught your eye? Argrave shook his head. The opposite. I have something rather eye-catching to show the world. I would sell it normally, but it fetches a bit too much for a street vendor. He tapped the deed-to-foam spire against his leg. Nicoletta paced about, scratching her chin. Putting something up for exhibit is a bit. Argrave felt sudden chills. Then, he learned something he did not know before. Earl Abner wishes to speak with me. He came to know this as clearly as if someone had shouted it into his ears. He reached for one of his pockets and pulled free the red stone disc the emissary of Earl Abner had given him. It was pulsing ever so slowly, as constant as the tides on the ocean. Argrave couldn't help but grin. I must go. Argrave started walking away. Wait, what are you? Nicoletta exclaimed, surprised. Urgent business. We can talk later in greater detail. For now, I have to go. Looks like I get my trump card a bit faster than I thought. Elias leaned over the edge of the wooden balcony, gazing at the courtyard in front of the Mateth branch of the Order of the Grey Owl. He had found his father's horse at one of the many horse breeders in Mateth, and the stable master referred him to Duke Enrico of Montesai. As much as he wanted to seize the animal right then and there, the horse master had the Duke's seal, and he did not wish to enrage Duke Enrico by acting out of turn in his territory. Argrave's behavior in the tower had been much different than what Elias was accustomed to, but that only redoubled his loathing. That the royal bastard had humiliated his father so, played him like a fool with his words. It affirmed Elias' doubt of the sincerity of the words that they'd exchanged in the Tower of the Grey Owl. A salamander in the hills of Vicentecu, my sister. What nonsense. Elias had seen Prince Indune come and leave. Just after him came Nicoletta of Montesai, shadowed by her friend, Mina of Veden. If there was one place Argrave was likely to come to, it would be this Mateth branch of the Order. Unlike Elias, after turning in his research, Argrave had left the Tower of the Grey Owl immediately, in order to graduate from acolyte to Wizard of the Grey Owl. he would need to head to one of the various branches of the Order of the Grey Owl in prominent cities. Though Elias had acted rashly and moved to Mateth as fast as the horse would take him, he was not entirely certain of what he should do. Furthermore, he did not know what he could do in the tightly guarded city of Mateth. His gut simply screamed that it was the right thing to do. His intuition was usually on point. His father, Reinhardt, had said that it was a trait shared by most of House Parban. Elias saw someone heads taller than most nearby leave the Order's branch. As he looked further, he distinguished that it was a man in dark leather gear with obsidian hair. Argrave. Has to be. Elias watched further, confirming the person's identity. He's talking to someone, Elias thought, taking mental notes. They're tall. Black armor, very well built. Weapons look expensive, possibly enchanted. A mercenary, maybe, but more likely an incognito knight. Given the height, it might even be someone from House Vaska, perhaps Ryan, though that's unlikely. The man is far too showy to move quietly with Argrave. Then, the two walked off into the streets in long strides. Elias stopped leaning on the balcony, watching as they carried off down the street. It would be easy to follow them, given their size. They could be spotted miles away. I'm not sure what they're doing, but I can at least try to find out. I can't be noticed. Chapter 15, Supersession. Someone is following you, Glimmin informed Argrave as they walked side by side out of the gates of Mateth. Really? Argrave asked, surprised. He was tempted to look back, but that might give things away. I suppose Prince Indune took a greater interest in me than I thought he would. Doubtful. He's an amateur, and rather young. He? Argrave repeated, getting a hunch. Describe him. Tall for a human. Shorter than us. Well built. Dark red hair. White clothes. Expensive. Somewhat worn. Glimmin listed off monotonously. Damn it, Argrave complained. Really? And he's alone? Glimmin grunted in confirmation. How annoying. Just scare him away, Argrave commanded in exasperation. Like a stray dog. No violence, preferably. I'll take the time to clean myself off. Glimmin turned on his heel and walked away without so much as a confirmation. Argrave moved onto the beach in his absence. He conjured some water with simple F-rank magic and cleaned some of the blood off his handkerchief, wiping what spots of red remained on his gear and body and draining them into the ocean. Responding to the blood, something swam up to shore. Argrave backed away warily, but then started smiling. It was a small school of iron-toothed piranhas. As their name suggested, they were vicious predators. In the game, they appeared whenever the player swam too far from the shore, killing them instantly. They kept the player locked on the continent of Berenda. It was one of the reminders that the game was a game, few and far between in Heroes of Berenda, where immersion was a top priority. But this isn't a game anymore. I could buy a boat ticket, sail from the continent, leave this nightmare behind. Let the continent fall into disarray. Why is this my problem? Why should I step forward to deal with these things? Argrave felt a lump in his throat. Almost vomited from seeing my own blood. Almost cried from getting punched. The future holds a lot of that, taking hits and giving them. I talk nonsense about killing druids. I've never even killed an animal. I'm no hero. What the hell am I doing? It was difficult to appreciate how good life was in the 21st century until one was deprived of its basic liberties. Cruelty and tyranny were relics of a bygone era for many people living well in first world countries. He had a warm bed, cheap food, and trivial concerns. He missed that. Argrave blinked quicker, holding back tears, a fact which only made him angrier at himself. It's done. Gilliman's deep, grating voice drew Argrave out from his depressive haze. Argrave quickly slapped the wet handkerchief on his face to hide his embarrassment. The water was cold, and it sharpened his mind back to the task at hand. He wiped his face down thoroughly until he felt that his thoughts were in check. All right, good. Argrave straightened his back and smoothed his wet hair. Now, I have to go communicate with an ancient god. I implore that you restrain yourself in the event of seeing strange, inhuman creatures and other such generally terrifying monstrosities. They are my business partners. If Gilliman had merely been considering that his self-confidence had landed him in an unfavorable contract, that consideration had turned into certainty. He kept an unsteady hand on the pommel of his ebony axe as he watched Argrave converse with an emissary of Erlebnia. The Vadaimon knew of Erlebnia and had a moniker for him, hand-reaching from the abyss. An abyss was bottomless and unknowable. It told of unending offerings. At the same time, all it took was a mere stumble, or perhaps the push or pull of a hand, and one would be forever lost within its depths. Erlebnia was an equitable god, true enough, but he was not kind. Glimmin made it a point to rarely ask the details of the contracts that he took. It was part of his faith. The Vadaimon's chief goddess and namesake, Vade, governed justice and contracts and guided the Vadaimon through the world. To surrender oneself to the flow of the world was considered a way of atoning for sins. Despite Gilliman developing vampirism, he fled execution. He was afraid of death. It left him with an indelible guilt, though. He had made his peace with his blasphemy by taking whatever contracts found their way to him, surrendering into Vade's hands. Though Gilliman did not ask questions, he learned much about his employer in a brief time. They were related to Vaska's prince somehow. Gilliman used this to explain why Argrave knew so much about everything around him. Royalty had vast information networks, but seeing this sight, Glimmen saw that he was wrong. Argrave could only be a mortal agent of Erlebni. Unexplained and uncanny knowledge on near everything around him, clear direction and purpose, and direct communication with one of the ancient gods' emissaries. What else could it be but a god's agent of change, a mortal hand to morph the world? But Gilliman was not at all swayed to break contract. Vade guided all Vadaimon, sinners or number. That she had guided him here only affirmed his faith. If this task should be his atonement for fearing death, let it be so. He refused to accept that his fate was to die a vampire. His life could not be so brief, so meaningless. Contrary to Gilliman's thoughts, Argrave was just as uncertain as, if not more so, than his snow elf companion. The emissary he was speaking to was different than the one he spoke with last time. His proportions resembled a T-Rex, giant legs, and two tiny, baby-like arms. The voice was identical to the previous, but Argrave was not sure if that was more or less unnerving. "I'm either in for an unpleasant interrogation or a lovely treat." "Which is it?" Argrave inquired, staring at its undulating eyes. "Neither." "A blessing from our Lord Erlebni cannot be called either of what you spoke of. It is an utmost privilege for any mortal to be given the blessing of supersession, and even greater still for it to be of highest quality." Argrave nodded. "If you're saying that, then I suppose that means things went well. Oral Valor is in the Bermuda Triangle, and the Viatulfar is returned to its rightful owner." "Is that a question?" "If so, it has a price." "No, it's not." Argrave shook his head. "His fate hardly concerns me. I came to receive my half of the trade, and then we will part." The emissary held one of its stubby arms to the side. "Indeed." "Come to our Lord Erlebni shrine, then." The emissary trudged away. Argrave could feel its giant feet shake the ground as it walked up the stairs carved into the tree's roots. He followed behind, keeping a fair distance away. It moved to the side of the shrine, towering over Argrave. The same stone shrine awaited him, those melting eyes seeming to stare into his soul. The reddish mercury portal on its mouth moved soundlessly. "Offer obeisance," the emissary commanded. Argrave looked at it for a second, confused. "Bow," it explained further. "I know what it means," said Argrave, lying through his teeth. Argrave slowly dropped to his knees and bowed before the statue. When he straightened his back, he kept his eyes fixed on the portal. He had seen what happens when one receives a blessing from Erlebni, but he still felt a great deal of caution. A large arm reached out from the portal, directly towards Argrave's head. It was difficult to suppress his base instinct to dodge. He felt nothing touch his head, but the arm most certainly moved towards him, into him, likely, moving through his cranium like some kind of ghost. He felt a searing feeling throughout his body, not pain, per se. It was somewhat frightening, yet concurrently oddly refreshing. It felt as though he'd just taken a drink of icy water, and he could feel it moving through his entire body. Then, as though his frequency had been adjusted, he felt a distinct connection to something. It was like being amidst an ocean, except that ocean was also flowing through him. The feeling was so overwhelming, yet at the same time, completely empowering, as though he could summon the seas to flatten the continent. "This is Erlebni magic, the power of a god, springing from within me." Once Argrave made that realization, the feeling disappeared, and Argrave fell backwards, breathing quickly. He nearly tumbled down the stairs. There was new knowledge in his head, knowledge of the blessing of supersession. It felt so complete he did not even feel the desire to test his newfound ability. "The transaction is finished," the emissary said quietly, uncaring of Argrave's condition. "We will return to the side of our Lord Erlebni." Once those words passed, rather than crawl back into the portal on the statue's mouth, the emissary simply vanished as though it never was. Sound returned to the forest. Argrave took some time to calm himself and do some introspection. He fumbled into his breast pocket to retrieve the bronze hand mirror and examined his stats. Traits: tall, sickly, weak, intelligent, magic of inity, high, blessing of supersession, max. Skills: elemental magic, D, blood magic, D, healing magic, D, illusion magic, D, inscription, E, imbuing, E. He stashed away the mirror, reflecting. Even with this power, he could still only use D-ranked spells. Blood magic, the strongest magic he had at his disposal, still required vitality to function, though he could certainly deal a massive amount of damage in the 5-minute period of the blessing of supersession. Until he reached C rank, many opponents were still far beyond him. High-ranked wizards, for instance, could conjure wards that would utterly invalidate all of his petty D-ranked spells. High-tier warriors generally outfitted themselves in gear warded against lesser magic and ranged attacks. Argrave came to his feet, carefully stepping down the stairs. Glimmen waited there, appearing as calm as ever. "That was a pleasant vis-a-vis," said Argrave drolly. "Productive." Glimmen did not respond, and Argrave could only see the man's mouth on account of his Viking-like helmet. The Vadaimon mercenary was well known among players for being unshakable. Argrave felt glad he had hired the elf, though he felt some guilt that he'd left so many details out. Argrave dismissed his thoughts. "With this out of the way, our next few days will be a lot less hectic. For you, at least. I intend to hole up in study and perform menial errands in preparation for our druid hunt. Oh, and if Nicoletta pulls through, an auction." "What fun!" With a heel turn, Argrave started to move away from the shrine. Perhaps it was only his imagination, but he thought he heard a sigh of relief from his snow elf companion. Chapter 16, Firebrand and the Cat. Elias trudged up the hill leading to the Montesi estate with heavy steps. Embarrassingly, he had been caught by Argrave's escort in seconds. He still recalled the giant of a man cornering him, staring him down with those pure white eyes of his. They had the same cold steel glint that he saw in his father's eyes. Sometimes, a war veteran, a man of many battles. But at least that unfortunate encounter told Elias that Argrave's escort was not someone from Vaska. None of Vaska's royalty had white eyes. He looked more a mercenary than a knight. Elias was unsure what Argrave intended to do. Consequently, he decided to take the matter directly to Duke Enrico. He stopped a fair distance away from the gated wall leading to House Montesi's grandiose estate. Unlike most noble houses in the kingdom of Vaska, House Montesi resided in a mansion. The city of Matoth was a fortress in and of itself, and House Montesi always prided itself on treating the common folk fairer than most houses. What better way to symbolize that than to live in the same area as they? Elias straightened his clothes and walked up to the gate. Two knights stood on guard, and they watched him passively. A blue swordfish, the symbol of House Montesi, decorated their shield and breastplate. Elias walked to them, reaching into his pocket to retrieve a seal bearing the golden lion of House Parban. "I am Elias of House Parban, heir to Margrave Reinhardt," he greeted the knights levelly. "I would speak to Duke Enrico on urgent matters." The knights out front of the gate straightened. They looked at each other, each trying to puzzle out how to respond. The first to speak wasn't the knights, though. "Whoa, hey," came a high-pitched voice from behind the gate. Elias stepped to the side and peered into the estate. Mina walked up to the gate and grabbed the bars. "It's Elias." "Wow, guess the Margrave sent you personally, huh?" "Mina," Elias greeted. "I came to speak to the Duke." At the gate, one of the knights decided to head into the estate, presumably to bring the news of Elias' arrival and decide whether or not he should be allowed in. "Why would that be, I wonder?" she asked sarcastically. "Missing a prize horse? Angry dad?" "Maybe a little bit of both." Elias paused, not wishing to admit he'd come here without his father's permission. He decided to change the subject. "And why are you here, and not in Count Elgar's territory?" "PFFT." She scoffed, and then climbed up the fence until she sat atop one of the stone pillars between the metal bars. Her golden hair reflected the sunlight brilliantly. "I doubt the ninth child, a daughter, especially, will be missed sorely. Nikki's a lot more fun than any of my family, anyhow." "I see." Elias nodded, and then repeated what he'd told to the knights. "I need to speak to the Duke." "About what?" Mina pressed. "My uncle's imprisonment," he said after hesitating. "Not about Argrave?" she said amusedly. "You're not so good at lying, you know." Elias didn't respond. "Come on, don't be so mute. If it is about Argrave, I might be able to help a little." Elias raised a brow. He decided to test the waters, if only just. "He met with Prince and June, did he not?" "Yep," Mina said with a smile. "He and Indune met in the Order of the Grey Owls branch here at Matoth, and then Grave walked out caked in poorly cleaned blood. Nikki thinks that he got punished for returning the thesis Indune stole from her." "That's nonsense," Elias dismissed immediately. "He probably staged the whole thing to earn your trust." "Sheesh." "And Nikki said I was paranoid." Mina stood atop the pillar and jumped down in front of Elias. "Considering we stumbled into him on accident, I doubt it." "And his general vibe was weird," she said ponderingly. "He's a man of ill character," Elias insisted. "He crippled my sister years ago. He stole my father's horse with his silver tongue." Mina laughed. "What? He talked your father into letting him go free with a 6,950 gold horse?" "No, he..." Elias paused, unable to remember the details of what his father had said. "It was stolen." "Well, your father stole him." She poked Elias' chest. "And he was ready to kill Nikki's escort if he didn't comply." "I consider it justice." "Hilarious justice, at that." "I still laugh when I think about it." Elias stared at Mina's yellow eyes, considering how to proceed. Nicoletta was a person of good character. Mina had a reputation as a trickster, but if she was friends with Nicoletta, she could not be disreputable. Elias decided to be honest. "I watched him leave town with some giant man, a mercenary or a knight, maybe. I tried to follow them, but his escort spotted me in mere minutes." "He was a powerful man." "Argrave's clearly not going to be idle, and he has something to hide." Mina tilted her head. "Grave was talking about the bear at a troop auction, but he suddenly left on urgent business. Some kind of magic item was glowing." Mina sighed. "Listen, Elias, I'll be honest with you. Nikki has already made up her mind to give Grave some trust." He had the opportunity to cause great friction between Parban, Montesi, and Vedden, but he instead decided to go with the Margrave to avoid bloodshed. After seeing him all shaken after talking to Indune, she's only more committed to that trust. "Even if she knew something, I doubt she'd tell you." Mina shook her head. Elias turned away, sighing and falling into thought. "But," Mina continued, raising a finger, "I've seen Nicoletta spend fortunes on acts of misplaced charity. She's given her life's earnings to your average marketplace swindler. She's misplaced her trust thousands of times before. She's trusting. I think Grave isn't such a bad guy, but he's still a Vaska." "What are you getting at?" Elias asked, turning back. I'm a lot better at keeping out of sight than you, especially with my illusion magic. With a dad like mine, you learn very quickly that being unseen is better than standing out. I can even help keep you out of sight. I want to trust Argrave, but I also like to give my trust carefully. Even if he likes to make fun of me, Nikki needs more reliable friends, and he hasn't let her down yet. I used some minor illusion magic. Didn't seem to phase Argrave's escort. Elias dismissed. Did you use C-rank illusion magic? Mina beamed. Elias furrowed his brows. You've already reached C-rank? What can I say? She asked boastfully. Special consideration for my thesis, C-rank magic at the young age of 19. Of course, Nikki says I should focus on other fields of magic, but elemental magic and stuff like that is boring. And you're willing to help me find out what he's up to? Elias sought to confirm. Like I said, I need to confirm he's trustworthy. Mina crossed her arms. I might have done it alone, but now that you're snooping around, I can't help myself. The knight that had moved to the estate returned. He walked to Elias and bowed. Young Lord Parban, the Duke said that he is willing to receive you. Of course, if you bother Nikki and her dad. The offer's off the table, Mina said. So, what'll it be, Mr. Firebrand? What? Why? Elias asked, confused. See, this is why you're terrible at sneaking about. No sense of covetousness. She stretched her hand up and flicked Elias' forehead. I won't explain myself. Elias frowned, considering briefly if he was being deceived. After deliberating for a long time, he said to the guard, tell the Duke that the matter resolved itself, and he needn't meet with me. Mina smiled. All right, Nieto. Let's see if he's a snake in the grass or a mouse on the lawn, Mr. Firebrand. She walked past him, arms behind her head. Elias trailed behind, calling out, why are you calling me that? Despite Argrave claiming that their days of preparation would be less hectic, Glimmin was worked tirelessly. As a vampire, Glimmin did not need sleep as long as he remained fully sated. Argrave simply refused to sleep, working through the night and sleeping in small bursts of 2 or 3 hours. During the day, Argrave would venture on shopping trips. He seemed to know the city perfectly, and moreover, he knew where everything that he needed was. The young man had access to some ingredients Gilliman could not hope to get due to Argrave's status as a wizard of the Grey Owl. At night, Argrave would alternate between trying to advance his magic to C rank and working on a project he deemed important. It was during those hours that he drove Gilliman to brew poisons and potions. Though Argrave briefly tried to brew the potions himself, he declared that his wrists were too flimsy for this work, and furthermore that the act itself was terribly unclean and altogether unpleasant. Gilliman could not disagree on the second account. Gilliman was no stranger to alchemy. Sometimes, poisons were needed to dispatch a particularly hardy target. More often, one needed potions for healing, or for an edge in battle. That stated, Argrave's knowledge of alchemy surprised even the veteran snow elf. Though Argrave was of little help in the brewing process, he knew the ingredients very well, and Gilliman learned many new recipes. Some of them were frighteningly effective and surprisingly cheap. At some point, the innkeeper kicked them out, complaining of the terrible smell brought about by the brewing. Argrave speedily moved them into an abandoned house, somehow managing to find a hidden key that unlocked the back door. Gilliman could not help but wonder if Erlebner was in the man's ears at all times, whispering him all of the secrets in the world. Argrave was not solely inhuman, though. He cooked for himself, and frequently spoke of how he missed making certain meals and eating spicy food. Most often, he simply forgot to eat, so absorbed he was in his tasks. Despite his efforts, he struggled to reach C-rank magic. The crimson-haired man, whom Argrave referred to only as the self-righteous German shepherd in human skin, seemed to have abandoned the notion of following them. Gilliman did not see him again. Their days passed by in peace, barring the occasional nightly outing Gilliman took to obtain more blood. It was oddly nice to have one that knew his secret of vampirism, despite Argrave's incessant jokes about it. The more they prepared for the assault on the Vadiamond Druids, the more comfortable Gilliman became with the task. Argrave did not seem an inexperienced brat. Indeed, his insights into the assault surprised Gilliman at times. He dared not grow arrogant, though. Tyros the Tempestuous was famous in Vaiden, and he could not be taken lightly. Like this, the days passed steadily onwards. Soon enough, a week had gone by. It was the day that Argrave had designated they would move on the Druid's Haven. Chapter 17, Theory to Reality. Moonlight filtered through the poorly boarded windows of the abandoned house, leaving long slivers of orangish light across the decrepit floorboards. Argrave sat on a table, gazing up at the red moon with tired eyes. He was growing used to the strange sight, if only just. Across from him, Gilliman was tidying up their preparations. He was carrying the bulk of things, glass bottles filled with viscous liquids, pouches full of tools and all the like. Soon, everything was ready. Gilliman took a moment to ensure he had not forgotten anything, feeling his axe, his dagger, his great sword, and his bow. Once he was content, he locked his white eyes on Argrave. We are ready. I'm not, said Argrave. Thought I could reach C-rank magic. I suppose I was big-headed. He shook his head lightly and stood. Well, no use moping. I don't think we'll lose. We can retreat if we do, Glimmer pointed out. Argrave was not sure if he was trying to comfort him. If we retreat without killing Tyros, it's rather pointless. We have two lose conditions. The way I see it, Tyros escapes, or we die. If he escapes, he'll just relocate alongside whichever Vadime androids are left alive, and I can't really find him again. He spoke of the matter very casually, but Argrave was a mess internally. Certainly, if this was Heroes of Berenda, he would have complete confidence in his success. He had faced greater challenges in-game, primarily for fun. Now, the former NPCs around him were living, breathing people, and he himself was not some player-controlled avatar devoid of mistakes. He had fear, doubt, inexperience, all of the symptoms of impending failure. But could he stop? The mirror in his pocket said no. Argrave grabbed a small satchel and a knife, slinging both to his leather gear quickly. He drank the contents of a vial on the table, and he was visibly reinvigorated. His pale skin returned to a semi-healthy pallor. "And venom stamina potions, disgusting," he said, moving his mouth to get rid of the taste. "Let's go." Glimmer threw on his Viking-like helmet, and the pair left the abandoned house. It was perhaps an hour before midnight, but the streets of Matoth still had many people moving about. Most were sailors, coming to the city after long voyages over the turbulent oceans. Though some dubious people prowled the streets, the two were not troubled by anyone on their way to the gate. Argrave watched for pigeons, but he could see none. The moon was close and bright, and they had very little difficulty seeing the way. Argrave left the gate closest to the coast, the same one he'd taken to go to Erlebni Shrine. The guards on duty watched with tired eyes but offered no greeting or questions. They broke off from the road, heading towards the forest, but they followed the edge of the trees without entering the forest proper. Once they came to a river, Argrave crossed, delicately walking over some exposed rocks. Once Gilliman reached the other side, Argrave pointed to the distance, where a mound of rocks sat at the bottom of the beginning of a mountain. Trees rose up the mountain towards its peak, decorating its entirety with green. One could faintly make out the river pouring down from the headwater in the mountain. "See those rocks stacked up?" He kept his finger straight. Gilliman followed Argrave's finger, and then nodded. "They stack up in a rough circle, but the inside is hollow. You can vaguely see some trees growing out," Argrave explained. "That's where they are. There's a crawl space they enter through, but we'll have to climb up the rocks for our purposes. I know a good route." "Scouts?" Gilliman questioned. At midnight, they convened to discuss their findings. "That's why we left so late at night, to sneak in far enough to deal with those scouts." Gilliman nodded. Argrave took a deep breath, and then moved towards the mound of rocks in the distance. He kept his eyes firmly fixed on the spot that the scouts usually stood. His heart sped up until it was as fast as a hummingbird's. He had come this far due to reliance on his game knowledge, but this was different. If he was off, the entire operation would go bust. Argrave could not spot anybody in the scouts' post, but he still felt uneasy as they approached. He motioned for Gilliman to follow close behind, and they started to shamble up the rocks. His legs shook, but he kept his focus as best he could. The climb was not especially difficult, and Gilliman gave him aid where he could. Nonetheless, Argrave was still very weak, and the climb taxed him more than he cared to admit. Once they were near the top, Argrave tentatively peeked his head over the mound of rocks, examining the pseudo valley below. It was crowded with growth, fungus, shrubs, and trees, but distinct paths had been carved into the landscape by frequent travels, like a game trail. There was a makeshift construction atop the rocks, a simple platform of wood planks with a ladder leading up to it, and railings preventing anyone from falling too easily. It had been covered partially with moss, evidencing it had been here for some time. Argrave climbed up the last bit of rocks, needing a slight push from Gilliman to crest the top. He climbed onto the wooden platform, crouching low and looking out across the druid's hideout. The trees, mostly oak, had thick leaves, and it was difficult to see particularly far. That was probably to their advantage. After beckoning Gilliman to come closer, he whispered between labored breaths, "We climb down the ladder. Then, you draw your bow. Prepare an arrow with the paralytic poison. The white sand spider and crawl root brew." "Why paralytic?" Gilliman questioned. "The druids are all connected to each other's animals in a grand network, with Tyros at the center. If one dies, the connection is severed, and they feel it." Gilliman grunted. "You go first. I'll prepare the arrow while you climb down." Argrave briefly resented Gilliman for telling him to go first. He felt like he'd just been pushed into the roller coaster, but he complied, heart pounding. The ladder was sturdy, and Argrave had never been afraid of heights. He was most afraid of being seen. He felt as though, at any second, an arrow would pierce his back. His legs trembled from fatigue and anxiety both. When his feet met the ground once more, Argrave could not be gladder. He slunk off into the undergrowth, ears perked for any sound. Gilliman followed closely behind him, landing as quietly as one in plate armor could. He walked to Argrave and crouched down beside him, knocking the arrow in his bow. It shone in the moonlight with the amber poison they'd prepared. "He'll return soon, I think." "Can you shoot him on the platform?" Argrave questioned. "Wait till he climbs up." "Why?" "To hide him. We can stash him beneath some shrubs." Argrave heard a crack above them and looked up in a panic. A rock fell down from the top of the mound, landing in the undergrowth. Argrave stared at the spot it came from intensely, staying deathly still. Eventually, When nothing further came, he answered Gilliman's question. "You're right. Not sure what I was thinking." Argrave shook his head. "When he comes by, be sure to hit him in a non-fatal spot. Not the neck, the head, or the heart. The poison slows the bleeding, so other than." Argrave paused, hearing something in the distance. The sound started growing louder. Argrave cast a D-rank illusion spell, Chameleon, that would keep them hidden so long as they did not move. Gilliman drew the bow back, his breathing steady and solid. The Vadiman walked into view. It was a woman. She wore battered leather armor that was the color of tree bark, but it was covered with scratches from branches and shrubs. Argrave was briefly taken aback that it was a woman, but he steeled his resolve. Man or woman? He had long ago decided to do this today. The decision, though, was not made by him. Gilliman exhaled and released the bow. All Argrave heard was a twang, like a guitar string broke. The elven woman jolted back and fell, exhaling as though she'd been winded. Gilliman and Argrave slowly rose to their feet and then walked towards the spot. The snow elf vainly clutched at the arrow in her shoulder, sputtering. Her eyes were locked on the two of them. Slowly, her contractions became more infrequent, and she was still, hands wrapped around the arrow. No blood flowed from the wound. The effect of the poison. Argrave focused on the objective facts to distract himself from what was happening. It should last for a few hours. By then, Argrave trailed off. He hid his mouth with his gloved hands. He was shaking. It was getting better, but it was still there. Gilliman grabbed her legs and pulled her into an area with dense undergrowth, breaking some greenery and tossing it over her to better conceal her. Argrave peered ahead. In the distance, the trees began to thin up. The moonlight fell onto a more open area. There, most of the druids would be sleeping. "Come on," Argrave whispered. "There's an elevated spot that gives a good vantage point. We should start the assault from there. We'll be able to stay hidden for longer." Argrave led Gilliman through the undergrowth, taking great care to step quietly. They came to the spot he mentioned. Argrave even recognized some trees in the exact same location as they were in the game. In a small clearing below, the druids had established a small camp of uniformly built wooden structures not much better than tents. As they were scouts of Vaidan's military, they had rigorous schedules. They would all be asleep at this time in preparation for the next day. Tyro's building was by itself, far removed from most of the other constructions. Argrave motioned to Gilliman, and he came closer. They came to the top of the hill, hiding behind some denser bushes as they peered out across the camp. Argrave reached into his satchel and pulled out some glass bottles full of a roiling black gas. The edge of the glass was inscribed. Glass could hold enchantments. Argrave only knew E-rank inscription and imbuing, but he could add simple spells to glass bottles. He added an illusion spell to them, muffle. When they broke, they would do so soundlessly. "Are you sure you can throw these accurately?" Argrave whispered. "Yes." Gilliman took two of the bottles from Argrave's hand. "Do you want them on the building or near it?" "In front of the doorway would be best," Argrave said. "That building there," he said, motioning towards Tyro's building, "is Tyro's. Don't throw the gas near it. Everything we need is there. The scouts' maps, their assessment of defenses, and some very valuable books." Gilliman threw one of the bottles without warning, making Argrave's heart leap out of his chest. It landed squarely where Argrave had directed, and some of the gas spread out across the ground in front of a shack without a sound. Gilliman threw the next, and then motioned for Argrave to hand him another. He hit all of his throws near perfectly, barring one, which hit the wall of one of the shacks. "Now, get the ebonice arrow," Argrave instructed. Gilliman removed the quiver from his back, searching for the arrow. It had a blue strip on its center. He pulled it out and then slung the quiver back behind him. "When I ignite the gas, Tyro's is sure to come out. He may be with someone else, but I doubt it. Just in case, do not shoot anyone but Tyro's with that arrow. Tyro's has grey hair and a long grey beard." Gilliman nodded. He appeared so calm in that moment, despite the fact that they were about to face around 20 druids, including Tyro's, alone. Argrave envied that. "The druids' animals are being held over there," said Argrave, pointing opposite them. "If you hit Tyro's, they'll probably never arrive, as the center of their druidic connection helps them all communicate. If not, they will arrive quickly. They're mostly wolves, but they have some bears," Argrave recalled. "Not many for attack. Most of their attention is dedicated to those pigeons." Gilliman nodded again. He knocked the ebonice arrow into his bow but did not pull it back. "All right, time for potions," Argrave reminded himself. Gilliman retrieved one brew, but Argrave reached into his satchel and pulled out two glass bottles. He downed them quickly. One was a stamina potion, the other was a potion that calmed and focused. They tasted terrible. The effect took a moment to happen, and then, it felt like tendrils of ice were spreading throughout his brain. His body stopped shaking, and he felt reinvigorated. Argrave held his hand up, calm as he'd been in months. He held his hand towards the first of the 4 shacks. He cast a simple, slow-moving elemental spell at D rank, Fire Pulse. A ring of fire burst from his palm, drifting through the air slowly. He swept his palm to the left, then cast another. Soon enough, 4 rings of fire were drifting through the air. Gilliman drew his bow back, aiming it at Tyro's shack. There, Fire Pulse moved ever closer to its target. Argrave watched it, holding his breath. When it was just feet away from its target, He saw some movement in the corner of his eye. Someone poked a head out from one of the shacks, scratching their eyes. They spotted the ring of fire heading towards them. Argrave held his breath. The Vadaimon raised a hand, obviously preparing to cast a spell. At that moment, the rings of fire all reached their target. As soon as they touched the gas, the flames leapt forward like a lunging snake, immediately enveloping and entering the shacks. A dread howl echoed through the grove, the mix of what sounded like 1,000 animals coming awake at once. The birds screeched, the wolves howled, the bears roared, and the snow elves screamed. In surprise or pain, Argrave did not know. Their assault had begun. Chapter 18, Raging Tempest, Roaring Flames. In planning this assault, Argrave confronted a fact about himself. He was not eager to fight. He had no desire for war or battle. Anxiety led him to where he was, anxiety that, if he did nothing, his life would slip from his fingers, spiraling towards misery and death. Argrave knew the fate of the world. The coming wars, plagues, natural disasters, and Gerektik Kiat. He was the only who did. This knowledge, in his eyes, laid a burden upon him to act. Perhaps it was the only reason he was here in this realm to begin with. It was the reason he was here, today. Time seemed to move slower once the druids' shacks had been consumed in flame, yet Argrave still felt that things were moving too quickly. The druids screamed and thrashed about, consumed by chaos. They had been sleeping, and after waking up to flames, they did not act rationally. Some thought fast enough to cast water magic, but the effort was uncoordinated. Furthermore, the gas that Argrave had used was particularly insidious. It was harvested from a reptile attuned to fire called a white tongue, and the flames it produced burned incredibly hot. The temperature would fade, but for now, it was far deadlier than the average fire. Both Guilliman and Argrave stayed and watched Tyro's building. The initial strike was pivotal, and because of the chaos it caused, it allowed them to retain the element of surprise longer. The druids could not coordinate properly. A few seconds stretched as the fires burned, and then, a pair of people ran out from Tyro's shack. Argrave heard it wang, and Guilliman released the ebon ice arrow. Perhaps it was the potion enhancing his senses, but he swore he could follow it with his eyes as it whistled through the air. Tyros, an experienced general and spellcaster, had already prepared a magic barrier to block potential threats, shielding both himself and his company. This was not unexpected. Argrave prepared ebon ice for a reason. Ebon ice was not a metal, despite being black and metallic looking. It was ice, magical ice hailing from Vaiden that greatly interfered with magic. On contact with magic, it would dispel it. If it pierced a spellcaster's body, though, their ability to cast spells would be severely diminished. The arrow they'd made was barbed. If it struck, it would not be easy to remove without sundering yet more flesh. The arrow met Tyro's barrier and the magic shattered soundlessly, fragmenting like glass. Continuing onward, it struck Tyro's forearm, piercing deep into flesh. The snow elf druid staggered back, grabbing the other with him for support. The other druid cast a weaker barrier spell and moved forward, shielding Tyro's with their body. He is hit, Guilliman said matter-of-factly, though Argrave barely heard it. Underneath the din of chaos, the area around them seemed to quiet down as the ebon ice took effect. The roaring animals quieted, their cries lighter and more confused. Tyros was using a druid's spell, Progenitor, to give a portion of his abilities to the druids working with him in his scouting unit. Now that he was affected, they were all affected. The chaos, ignited by the flames, was expounded by the severance from their leader. Go for Tyros, Argrave directed quickly. I will follow shortly behind. Dispatching him quickly is pivotal for our success. Guilliman stood from cover, stepping away from the trees and into the clearing. Argrave watched him go, chest swirling with slowly dulling fear as the potion took effect. He clenched his fists, grit his teeth, and pursued shortly behind Guilliman. As he grew closer to the flames which still raged furiously, he felt the intense heat and the nauseating smell of burnt hair. There was another smell. It was putrid, but Argrave could not question more beyond that. He had no time. Argrave felt bare and exposed. Without a barrier, he did not know any ward magic, but he continued onwards, Tyros and the Vadaimon beside him consuming his focus. He reached into his satchel bag and pulled free the last bottle, popping its cork off. It was cold, like touching ice. Tyros tried to use his magic with his uninjured hand, but Argrave could see the spell matrix breaking before his eyes. Tyros quickly deduced what was happening and instructed the one with him to provide aid. Guilliman ran quickly across the clearing, coming ever closer towards Tyros. The Vadaimon beside Tyros yanked on the arrow fiercely, but the wounded druid only cried out in pain. Tyros pushed the other away, directing him towards the approaching Guilliman. The druid conjured elemental magic from behind the barrier. A spear of wind hurtled out towards the snow elf, but he swatted it aside with the ebon ice axe, and its magic dissipated into the air. It did succeed in slowing the mercenary, however. Argrave raised a hand and used blood magic for the first time, conjuring the spell Pierce, which shot a fast-moving projectile in a straight line. It was necessary to use blood magic to break the barrier. No elemental spells Argrave knew would suffice. At once, a red bolt no wider than a pencil tore through the air. After using blood magic, Argrave felt as though someone had torn a tendon from his wrist and cried out in pain. The barrier was pierced, though, and the druid beside Tyros fell onto his back, struck squarely in the stomach. Glimmer proceeded unabated. Tyros did not remain idle, however. With his free hand, he grabbed the arrow. He pinned his arm underneath his leg and pulled. The arrow was freed, but the man's arm nearly split in half. Tyros shouted in agony, but he still tossed aside the arrow, raised his hand, and cast magic. As soon as Argrave saw Tyros free the arrow, he brought the bottle he held to his mouth and drank. It burned as though he had dropped a cube of dry ice in his mouth. In a matter of seconds, that cold feeling spread throughout his entire body. Then, he triggered the blessing of Supersession. At once, he felt a great sea of magic billowing within him, threatening to erupt free from his mouth, his nose. Despite this, the potion he drank earlier kept him calm. Though Argrave wished to dispatch Tyros quickly, he had always been considering the notion that the high-ranking spellcaster would be able to cast spells. Tyros, even amidst pain, was a veteran of battles and an experienced spellcaster. His first priority once he was free of the ebb on ice would be to regain control of the situation. To do that, he would need to stop the attackers and help his men. In such a situation, Tyros would most likely call on elemental magic, a water spell with a large area of effect. Argrave could think of many the druid might cast, but his conclusion was that the best way to counter them all was with potent ice magic. Argrave had drunk the blood of a winter nymph, a very deadly ingredient, ordinarily, but it enhanced one's ice magic, and its side effects were partially abated by the presence of heat. Two twin geysers of water erupted from Tyros' hand towards Gilliman, swirling together and forming a cone that tore the earth. As it proceeded, water showered everywhere indiscriminately. Argrave recognized the spell, the B-rank magic, Rip Current. Gilliman paused, and Argrave advanced in front of him. He held both hands out, and D-rank matrices formed in front of his hands. He felt the chill of the winter nymph's blood rushing to his fingers, turning them grey and numb. Argrave cast Frost Wave, and a burst of sheer cold of ridiculous magnitude erupted forth. He continued to use Frost Wave, and the dangerously fast Rip Current slowed before pausing in air. Argrave used another spell, Wind Hammer, and shattered the ice. Glimmer rushed forth, pushing past the falling ice crystals. Tyros stood shakily and walked backwards, preparing another spell. Glimmer raised the axe to dispatch him. But the druid beside Tyros that Argrave had attacked earlier had not died from the stomach wound. He interfered briefly with the snow elf mercenary, grabbing his legs as he tried to move. It was enough time for Tyros to gain distance and prepare another spell. Argrave aimed towards the druid grappling with Gilliman and cast an E-rank lightning spell, Bolt. It tore through the air and struck him, and Gilliman broke free from his grip. Argrave used Bolt time and time again in quick succession until the druid had fallen. The chill of the winter nymph's blood was growing harsher, and Argrave sidled towards the flames, their heat a welcome reprieve. Gilliman came just before Tyros, but the man had prepared another spell. A small tornado erupted forth. Gilliman slashed its center with his ebon ice axe and it dissipated, exploding in all directions as the magic lost its will. The sheer power of the wind sent Argrave stumbling, and the flames roared and twisted, redoubling in heat. Tyros was knocked on his back. Though Gilliman barely stumbled from the wind explosion, his ebon ice axe flew free from his grip. The Vadiman mercenary drew his greatsword and proceeded, stabbing it towards Tyros. Tyros conjured a barrier, and the greatsword bent slightly when it impacted. Argrave's mind worked as fast as it ever had. He rushed past the fragments of ice littered on the ground, grabbing the ebon ice arrow and throwing it clumsily. He used wind magic to send it faster, but it had minimal effect on account of the ebon ice. The arrow flew, spinning in the air, and struck the barrier sideways. It was enough, though. Tyros' ward fell, and Gilliman seized the opportunity. He stepped forward and stabbed Tyros' eye. His struggle ceased instantly. Now that the largest threat was dealt with, Argrave did not lose himself in celebration. He whipped his head back around towards the roaring flames, proceeding onwards with breath surging white out of his mouth. He used one of the best D-rank elemental attack spells, Writhing Lightning. Even if it missed its target, the lightning would surge along whatever surface it had struck towards living opponents. Accuracy was not his concern with magic flowing into him from Merlabon. Lightning danced through the air, the power of the blessing of Supersession enabling and encouraging him to attack with reckless abandon. The further he proceeded into the flames, the more his pain from drinking the winter nymph's blood lessened. Whatever living moved within the flames, he attacked. Their screams of anguish were hidden by the crack of the thunder echoing out into the forest. When he felt his body was no longer under duress from the winter nymph's blood, he retreated from the flames, watching for movement. Gilliman came to stand beside Argrave, and so he cast water magic to begin diminishing the inferno. Gilliman had narrow-knocked, watching everything in front of them. Slowly, the fires began to die down, and the scenery was revealed in earnest. The clearing, which had been grassy and green, had been charred black. The shacks were burnt to ashes. The druids' bodies were everywhere, charred beyond recognition. Some were twisted, still spasming and sparking with lightning. Time stretched as Argrave maintained a wary intensity. Seeing no movement, he slowly calmed. As the adrenaline began to fade, Argrave's dulled senses became clearer. Argrave recognized the putrid smell he sensed earlier. It brought back a memory. Whenever his father would make hamburgers, his brother would always demand that his hamburgers be burnt. That same smell hung in the air. With that realization, the crushing reality of what he had done set in, and Argrave fell to the ground, vomiting profusely. His vomit was mercury-colored because of the winter nymph's blood. His eyes and nose were dripping, and the pain began to set in. He had been cut from the ice shards and burned half a dozen times, but the wounds were light and he barely even noticed it until now. Glimmen stood above him, alert as ever, seemingly unaffected by it all. Argrave's vomiting fit continued until he was dry heaving. Once the blessing of supersession wore off, he felt entirely back in reality. He stayed on the ground, trying to bring his mind to heel. Glimmen scanned the forest line, watching in caution. Having deemed there were no more threats, Glimmen released the bowstring slowly, keeping the arrow nocked. He walked off, but Argrave was not sure where. It was only once he returned with his ebony axe in hand that Argrave deduced things. He felt a big hand wrap around his arm, and he was hoisted to his feet. "Drink," prompted Glimmen, holding a canteen to his face. It was filthy, but Argrave could not be bothered by his germophobia with all that was occurring around him. He drank, but the water made him choke. "Drink slowly," Glimmen added. Argrave obeyed, taking small sips. "The battle is won. All of the druids are dead. You can take time." Some time passed. Argrave stayed standing, staring at the scene that he had been the cause of. Argrave was slowly beginning to get his bearings again. "You did well. 2 men killed an entire scouting party from Vaiden. Your strategy and bearing were both excellent." Argrave processed the words. Though they may have been intended to console, they did not make him feel good. Chapter 19, The Sad Clown. The Druids' haven still echoed with noise for a time. With all of the Druids dead, the animals would be ripped from their magical control. They were probably fleeing or fighting, having abruptly been given freedom. Argrave still stared blankly at the scene of carnage, as though committing it to memory. Glimmen tended to a few of the bodies, slicing wounds in them to fill his flasks of blood. "I'm pathetic," Argrave thought. "Faltering here, faltering at this. The first step of the stairway, and I'm out of steam. I have to do better than this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the bronze hand mirror, hands shaking fiercely. Glimmen finished his task and walked to Argrave's side. Argrave turned to look at him. At once, his entire demeanor seemed to shift, his blank look regaining life and vigor. He stowed away the mirror. That winter nymph blood was foul. Argrave scoffed and held his nose. "I should read labels before I go shoving things down my throat." Glimmen was taken aback for a moment by the abrupt change in expression. "It worked, no, I suppose. Next time we go druid hunting, I'll think of something else," Argrave said with exaggerated cheer. He turned on his heel. "I would say we could hunt more now, but the scouts on the other ends of this place are going to be long gone. They'll flee and return to Vaiden post-haste." "Is that what you want?" Glimmen inquired. "Yes," Argrave said with a nod. "If all of the druids simply disappeared, it would take longer for the rest of Vaiden to respond. If they receive news of what's happened, they'll act on it quicker." "Quick action means less time to prepare," Glimmen countered. "Vaska is about to go to war. A civil war, unfortunately. The invasion is inevitable. You know Vaiden. Conquest is their divine duty. Quick action might be the only way to salvage this situation." Argrave looked up the hill to Tiro's mostly unaffected shack. "We should go to Tiro's hut. He was teaching some of his fellows, and his druidic spellbooks, invaluable for me, considering their rarity in Berenda. I don't even think the Order of the Grey Owl has them." He marched his way towards Tiro's hut, boots sinking into the wet ash and making unpleasant squishing noises. Argrave stopped at Tiro's shack, looking around inside. He grabbed the doorway to the shack. Glimmen noticed that Argrave's hands were still shaking fiercely. The snow elf mercenary followed behind Argrave. "Since Tiro's the Tempestuous was here, I can't doubt your claims that an invasion will occur. But humans do not seem as fond of warfare as my kind. Do you hope to stay the civil war by inciting the invasion earlier?" Argrave proceeded into the shack, looking about. "The civil war is inevitable. House Vaska wants House Parban to rebel. If that does happen, House Montesai will likely join them, leaving Matath undefended. The invasion needs to be brought to light before then. That's why we need their reports. I think Reinhardt fundamentally misunderstands the king. King Felipe does not care about life. I tried to tell him this when he kidnapped." Argrave paused, looking back at Glimmen. "Oh, I never told you about that." "It's not important. Anyway, Reinhardt will start a civil war." 2 voices rang out simultaneously. One was female, the other male. "Wait," the woman said. "What are you talking about? A civil war, an invasion?" The man said. Glimmen drew his greatsword quickly and turned his back. Argrave, too, turned his head, and saw a familiar face that he did not expect to see. Elias of Parban stood at the entrance of Tiro's shack. "Why in there?" Argrave trailed off, befuddled at seeing this man here. Glimmen stepped forward with his greatsword, and Elias stepped back, ready to fight. Argrave called out, "Wait a moment, Glimmen." Glimmen held in place. "This is that same one that was following you a week ago." Elias was undeterred, but he relaxed his posture. "I asked you a question, Argrave. What in the god's name happened here?" "What are you talking about?" Argrave shuffled on his feet, mind spinning as he tried to deduce how this situation came to pass. Don't try to fool me with a witty answer. Elias spat, stepping forward. Who are these people? Why did you kill them? Very wise to yell at someone who just committed a brutal slaughter, Argrave wished to say, but he held his tongue. How did you get here? I followed you, Elias said quickly. I wanted to see what you were up to. Seems I was right to do so. So how do you explain this? He gestured behind him fiercely. Argrave bit his lip, then asked himself, why am I keeping this secret? We came here to get the scouts' plans. I wanted to present them to Nicoletta, and eventually to Duke Enrico. Elias isn't necessarily an enemy. These men were advanced scouts for an invasion, Argrave explained gently and concisely, holding his hands in the air to appear non-threatening. They're spellcasters, as you probably saw. In their homeland, they're called druids. They know magic that controls animals. They've been using that magic to spy on Mateth and the villages near it for some months now, gathering intelligence for an invasion. Elias stared, his ruby eyes wide with some mixture of confusion, surprise, and hostility. That's ridiculous. Then come inside, see for yourself the fruits of their labor. Argrave stepped forward and tapped Guilliman's pauldron with his knuckle, motioning for him to put the weapon away. Guilliman put away his greatsword and stepped back towards Argrave. He kept his hand near the ebony axe strung to his waist. Elias walked forward tentatively, and Argrave beckoned him closer. Argrave grabbed one of the many parchments littered throughout the room. Argrave scanned the document quickly. Look at this. A request for a detailed drawing of the structure of the walls of Mateth. I wonder who would order such a thing. Quite insidious, Argrave prattled off drolly. Elias snatched the paper from his hand and read it, then moved to other documents in the room, his frown growing deeper. Really, I'm surprised you were willing to get Mina to help you come here, Argrave commented. He turned back towards the shack's entrance. Don't deny it. I have a good memory for voices. Elias glanced at Argrave, but turned back to the papers, absorbed in their content. Nothing came of Argrave's call, and he sighed. Drat. She's scared. If I had some catnip on hand, I'm sure she'd come running, but alas. Argrave paused, waiting for an outburst. Guess she really left. He turned and picked up a book. Then he spun around, raising the book in the air as though to throw it. He heard a brief yelp in the corner of the shack, and he pointed. Aha, there. I win again. Win? Mina shouted, dispelling her invisibility. Yes, I found out where you were hiding twice. I consider that no small victory, knowing you. Argrave put down the book. Well, since you're both here, you're being enlisted. Elias turned to Argrave. This is a serious matter, Argrave. Regardless of my opinion of you, that you found this. It's of grave importance. Yes, spare me the sappy monologue. Argrave waved his hands and walked to Tero's shelf. He looked at the books, taking out those that he found important and setting them on the table. I didn't find it, by the way. Everything I've been doing the past week or so has been related to putting an early end to this invasion. But how did you? Mina began to ask. Argrave interrupted. We can talk as we work. Help me gather this up. Elias, you'll have to carry all of the spell books. What? Elias said, stunned. What? Yourself? Argrave parroted back. You've carried my books before. This time is even more important. I'm cut, burned. My throat was nearly frozen solid, and I expended all my magic. Untrue. Actually, I used avialable magic. They don't need to know that. Argrave held a book out to Elias. Come on, we need to get these to Mateth post-haste. The Vadimen climbed down from the mound of rocks and into the forest, urgency flavoring their actions. One of them was unable to walk on his own and needed to be carried by one of their larger members. The party's white skin and light hair were very conspicuous in the moonlit forest. They rushed as quickly as they could, supporting their wounded comrade with their shoulder. As they walked, he was badly burnt, and a Lichtenberg figure marked his face. One of the druids cast healing magic, but the wounds were too severe to be fully dealt with. What happened in there? One of them asked the burnt snow elf as they moved away. How could we all? The snow elf swallowed his words. The burnt Vadimen raised his head, staring ahead in undisguised agony. He reached a hand and gripped the one who was speaking, pulling him close. The action brought the party to a stop, and they all huddled over their comrade. The exile. The burnt snow elf whispered vainly. Guilliman the Great. He forced out. Teros. Dead. Guilliman? One of the snow elves echoed, their hands shaking. It was Guilliman. He must have. The burnt snow elf nodded. One of his companions brought water to his lips, and he drank from the canteen, shaking. The other, human, a dread mage, hair as black as the abyss, breath billowing white from his mouth. The scouts shivered at the sight of their comrade's state and the fear in his words. We must return to Vaiden as quickly as possible, a male snow elf said, standing tall and looking through the forest, where the coast was. The humans know of our presence, with Tero's correspondence in their hands. They will know our plans. We must return to Vaiden before they have the opportunity to prepare themselves. A few pigeons swooped down from the sky, landing on another snow elf's shoulders. I kept my link with the birds. I'll send them with a letter ahead to Vaiden. The elf standing took a deep breath and exhaled. Vade wishes for this war to begin earlier than our patriarch intended. That we have survived is her will, too. Now, we can only do our best for Patriarch Draz. Chapter 20, Royal Road to Misery, 2. A black carriage traveled down the road, the light from the setting suns reflecting off its lavish gold decorations and brilliantly illuminating the road. Endune lazily slumped on the carriage's window, staring at the great capital Dirika far ahead. Dirika was called the City of Dragons. Detractors called it the City of Snakes, in reference to the Vasca's heraldry. The banners of the royal family hung from the walls, a great golden serpent coiled around a sword on a black field. Endune smiled, watching them sway in the winds. Dirika was built into the side of a mountain, ascending towards the peak until it rose to the Dragon Palace. One could see every level of the city, as the walls were not especially high. It was cordoned off into distinct sectors, divided by high walls and a long road down the center leading directly to the palace, the Royal Road. There were other entrances to the city. The Royal Road, though, could only be traveled by those of Vasca blood. It was not strictly enforced, but the gate only opened for royalty. The gargantuan gold gates of the Royal Road parted as Endune approached with his carriage. Endune pulled his head back inside the carriage and lowered the black curtains. 2 of the royal guards sat with him in the carriage, vigilant as ever. Outside, a great number of them guarded the carriage, golden armor matched with similarly decorated horses. It was a procession worthy of the heir to the throne. Endune's carriage passed beneath the gate. Far ahead, where the Royal Road exited Dirika and entered the Dragon Palace, a great host blocked the path. They held a white banner bearing a golden lion. Margrave Reinhardt stood at the head of the group, blocking all entry to the palace. One of the royal knights knocked on the side of Endune's carriage and poked his head in. Prince Endune. Margrave Reinhardt is blocking the royal road with his knights. What? Endune said in exasperation. He did not bother to look. Keep moving. If they refused to move, refused to stop. Being on the royal road was not illegal. The common people had to pass over it to reach other portions of the city very frequently. Blocking a royal's passage was, though, and Endune did not assume the Margrave would have the gall to do so. Their carriage continued onwards, many of the royal knights moving to the front of the carriage in case they needed to move House Parban's knights from the road. Dirika was far quieter than it usually was when a royal returned, and the tension grew as the carriage rattled up the road. Slowly, the Margrave Reinhardt turned his back to see the coming carriage. He walked past the sea of white gold banners, walking towards the carriage until he stood directly in front of it. Another knock came, and the royal guard spoke again. The Margrave's knights refused to stand aside. Prince PFFT. Endune scoffed. As I said, just continue onwards. Should they still stand in the way, push them aside. He scratched at his chin. The knight nodded his head and pulled away from the carriage. Yes, my prince, the knight said hastily. Endune heard the order being relayed outside and smiled from within the carriage. He raised the curtains a little, watching the spectacle outside. The carriage continued up the pavement, pulled steadily by horses. As they neared House Parban, the royal knights spread out, pushing past them with their horses. The knights of House Parban were pushed about ungracefully, but a path refused to open. Despite the blatant provocation, the knights of House Parban remained firm. Reinhardt stared coldly, anger rising on his face, but he did not order his men to act. He had instructed them long in advance to bear with whatever shame the royal family hoisted upon them. A crowd was beginning to form near the royal road. A great horde of people gathered round, most of them workers and common laborers. They watched the scene, craning over each other to see. As the crowd grew larger, the knights on both sides grew uneasy. In the crowd, emotions become infectious. Though at first, calm prevailed as people watched the spectacle. One bold man let out a boo, and others were emboldened. Their expressions of disapproval echoed out, and the name of Margrave Reinhardt, a war hero, echoed throughout the city. Endune pulled back the curtain, a grim expression on his face now that he was being jeered as so. The 2 knights from across him watched him uneasily, fearing his temper, but he sat quietly. Something thumped against the carriage. Endune peeked his head out, only for something to whirl past his head and strike the inner coach. These damned. Endune fumed. He shut the curtains once more. With the confrontation between Parban's knights and the royal guard occupying the bulk of both groups' attention, the people were able to walk out into the street. At first, they only broke into the road to throw food or wood planks. Gradually, though, their harassment evolved. One laborer came too close to the carriage, and the 2 royal knights sitting with Endune decided to get out and deal with him. They kicked the man in the knee, casting him to the ground. They grabbed his burlap shirt and threw him away, sending him rolling. At this, the jeers turned hostile, and the crowd was incensed. The mob closed in from both ends, pushing at the royal knights from atop their horses. The royal guard tried to remain calm, but there was a deep oath brewing in the hearts of the people, and they were not deterred as they pushed past the gold-armored guards. They were a great tide of people, and they descended on the knights like a locust plague. A horse, startled, bucked and tried heartily to throw off the knight on its back. It kicked one of the people mobbing by, casting him to the stone with a split head. Few saw what truly happened, and soon enough, Hostile shoves evolved into a full-fledged attack. People tried to pull the royal knights from their horses, tear off their armor, and beat them. Few succeeded. The people gathered around Indune's carriage, their palms slamming against its surface. Indune grabbed near the sides, trying to stay balanced as it rocked. The horses attached to the carriage tried to bolt, digging into the crowd, and the carriage driver was pulled from the trap and beaten. Many royal knights drew their swords when they saw their master's carriage being assaulted. When the first cut whizzed through the air, all of the guards' discipline was lost. The royal knights shore through the crowd with reckless abandon, trying to be certain the prince would not be harmed. The crowd tried to disperse, but others behind them that did not know what was occurring prevented their withdrawal. The Margrave Reinhardt watched this, hand clenched tight on his banner. His breathing was quick and labored, deliberating what to do intensely. He saw a royal knight step atop a young man and jam a shield into his neck, severing his head. With that, the decision was made for him. Knights of Parban, protect the people. Pandemonium ensued. The line of House Parban's knights, angered with righteous fury, descended on the royal knights like a locust plague. Indune opened the carriage door and stepped outside, a smile on his face. He held his hand up and conjured a battle axe from thin air that shone with magic. Indune laughed heartily. Just this much, and he loses it? Indune jumped into the fray and tore through the knights of House Parban with reckless abandon. He blocked one knight's blow with the haft of his axe, then kicked the knight away before jamming the weapon's spike in his eye. He threw the axe and its sword above the head of a royal knight to bisect one of the knights of Parban. He conjured another, preparing to meet his next foe. Out of the corner of his eye, Margrave Reinhardt jumped above one of the knights, the banner of House Parban still held tight in his hands. He used it as a spear, jabbing it towards Indune. The prince blocked it with the blade of the conjured axe, staggering a few steps backward. So, the old war general finally lost his cool, Indune taunted, barely audible above the din. Do you know what this means? For you, or for me? The Margrave yelled back coldly. Indune held his hand out, sending a blade of wind hurtling forth. The Margrave ducked it, tossing aside the banner and grabbing a blade from a fallen royal knight. He kicked a helmet that had been dropped on the ground towards Indune. Indune swatted the helmet aside, and the Margrave surged forth like a crimson grizzly bear. The royal knights all broke free from their fight, rushing to intercept the Margrave. Indune, undaunted, stepped forward to meet the Margrave. The crowds broke away, screaming in fear as those they loved died around them. Reinhardt's scavenged blade fell upon the prince's battle-axe. The magical weapon shattered instantly, and the prince stepped back to dodge the tip of the blade. The Margrave stepped forward as though this was expected, delivering a quick punch to the prince's face. The prince jolted back, clutching his nose in surprise. A royal knight moved to intercept the Margrave. Indune held his hand out, conjuring a complex spell matrix. A prism of ice formed, rotating fiercely and firing spikes intermittently at the Margrave. Reinhardt took a step back, dodging a blow from the royal knight. He seized his attacker by the arm and held him in front of him, and the ice spikes met the royal knight's golden armor. It was well enchanted to ward against magic, but the royal knight still coughed blood from the force of the impact. The tide of battle surged towards the Margrave and the prince, both knights vying to protect their master. The Margrave held the royal knight tightly, pushing forth against the still firing ice spikes. Prince Indune started to conjure another battle axe, but the Margrave threw the blade he held. Indune fell on his back to dodge it. Reinhardt cast aside the royal knight he held, breaking free from the crowd of gold-armored royal knights. His ruby eyes shone with the ferocity of a wild animal as he rushed at Indune. The crown prince summoned a barrier, and the Margrave grabbed into his boot to retrieve a gleaming white knife. He stabbed the barrier, and sparks flew briefly before it shattered. Indune, flat on his back, raised his foot and kicked aside the Margrave's dagger. It flew away, jamming into the wall of a nearby building. The Margrave stepped and stomped at his face, but Indune blocked it with his arm. Indune prepared to grab Reinhardt's foot the next time it came down at him, but to his surprise, the Margrave walked past him. He stood atop the carriage wheel of Indune's vehicle, cupped his hands to his mouth, and shouted, "Retreat, return to Parban, prepare for war." His last sentence, "prepare for war," seemed to echo throughout all of Dirika. Indune came to his feet, ready to fight the Margrave more, but a tide of golden-armored royal knights surged in front of him, shields at the ready. The Margrave led his troops down the royal road, and the royal knights remained protecting their master. The knights of House Parban proceeded unimpeded, the forces at Dirika inadequate to prevent their escape. Indune caressed his tender arm. Suppose he's not a famous general for nothing. The crown prince moved to the wall where the white knife stuck into the wall. He pulled it out, placing his finger against the tip as he tested it. The royal knights gathered round, waiting for Indune's command. Indune watched as the Margrave's men pushed past the city guard. "Hear me, people of Vaska!" Indune shouted as the people ran from the scene of carnage, tripping over bodies in their haste to flee. House Parban have declared themselves enemies of Vaska, and henceforth Reinhardt is a traitor of the realm. If you like this audiobook, subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And join my Patreon if you want to support me, where you can find the complete collection Jackal Among Snakes audiobooks. Hurry up, what are you waiting for? Leave some comment and let me know if you guys like this story. or you have a web novel you like and want to hear its audiobook, I will be happy to create them for you. Please like, share, and leave a comment on the video.